with us this morning. We have a lot of great things happening at Walnut Street, as evidenced this morning, celebrating Graham, Allie, and all the new members that we have coming our way. You're going to have an opportunity, as you do every week, but a special opportunity at the end of September. I hope you've been keeping up with our Come and See Day, as that's kind of a fresh take on the old homecoming concept. This is a time where we can invite our friends, family that we've been thinking about inviting to church, bring them that day. We're going to have a meal afterwards. It's going to be catered. You don't have to worry about bringing anything to that meal. And then we're going to have an afternoon service like a fifth Sunday, and then we're going to be on with our day. But I hope that you will take advantage of that opportunity to invite your friends and family. As I said, there's a lot of great things happening right now. We just have to determine as a church family, is this going to be a moment or a movement? Because those are two very different things. If it's a moment or a flash in the pan, it's good for a while, but then it goes away. Let's use this as an opportunity to turn it into a movement where we are taking this community and this county by storm. If you're visiting with us, we're in a series, Jesus Is. Every Sunday morning, we're looking at an attribute of Jesus so that we can get to know Him better and serve Him deeper. And this morning, we're looking at Jesus being the one who overcomes. Many moons ago, there was a television series called Newhart, and it featured comedian Bob Newhart, and the show was centered around Robert Bob Hartley, who was a Chicago psychologist played by none other than Bob Newhart. And one particular episode, there was a woman coming in who had a particular phobia, and she tells Bob, I'm afraid of being put in a box and not being able to get out. I panic when I think about that. And Bob says, has anyone ever put you in a box? And she says, no, but I'm afraid of tight places. I can't get on elevators or anything where it's closed in. And he says, oh, so you're claustrophobic? And she says, yeah, that's it. I'm claustrophobic. And he said, well, I think I have enough here to determine a remedy. I'm going to give you a 2-word solution to your problem. And she says, oh, okay, I'm all ears. Should I write it down? He said, if that makes you more comfortable, but it's just 2 words. Are you ready for it? Here it is. Stop it. Now, I don't have the comedic talent that Bob Newhart has, so I won't finish the rest of the episode. But imagine if Bob Newhart was a preacher. I'm worried. Well, stop it. The Bible tells you not to. Well, I'm afraid. Well, stop it. God says, do not fear. Well, I feel guilty. Well, stop it. You can't live in the past. I'm afraid that all too often this is the method that we use as Christians, both on ourselves and on others, to overcome sin and the guilt that it brings. Is it a tried and true method that absolutely works? And the answer is no, it absolutely does not, but that doesn't keep us from employing it. It's the law and order method for dealing with sin. You've got a sin problem? Well, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, grit your teeth, try harder, study your Bible more, come to church more, bridle your tongue, control your actions, exercise better self-discipline, follow the rules, straighten up and fly right, have more faith. Just stop it. And I think we believe on a pretty profound level that this is the only real method of dealing with the sin in our lives and becoming a better disciple. But while the law and order method is popular, I think we can see that its results do not bear fruit. I went to see my doctor not long ago, and it was just for a checkup. And when we got done, he said, is there anything else, any other issues you're having you want me to address? I said, well, I'm having some shoulder pain. I said, it's nothing big, but it's enough to get my attention. I said, especially when I do this, it hurts pretty bad. And he said, okay, well, stop doing that. I mean, great medical advice, right? Now, he was kidding, of course, because we both understood that that doesn't get to the real root of the problem, that you got to go deeper in order to solve the problem. Look at John chapter 16. And beginning in verse 29, this is what John writes. He says, his disciples said, lo, now you are speaking plainly and are not using a figure of speech. Now we know that you know all things and have no need for anyone to question you. By this we believe that you came from God. Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Behold, an hour is coming and has already come for you to be scattered, each to his own home, and to leave me alone. and yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. These things I have spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage, I have overcome the world. There are two absolute certainties that are mentioned here in this passage, and maybe you picked up on them. Number one, tribulation can be expected. And number two, victory can be expected. Some of you remember sitting on your couch on Saturday afternoons watching ABC's Wide World of Sports. You remember that? And you have that iconic line from that show. Anyone remember what it is? Yeah, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And the opening montage shows all these symbols of victory, and then you have that ski jumper that is just tumbling over and looks like they met their demise. Well, what Jesus is guaranteeing here is the agony of defeat and the thrill of victory. There's going to be both. If you live long enough, you're going to experience both. Look at 1 John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and whoever loves the Father loves the child born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and observe his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is the one who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" So, same John from John chapter 16 to right here. And at first it may seem like that John is employing the law and order method. Want to overcome the world? Well, just believe in God. Just have faith. But keep in mind that these words were not written to people who were thinking about or pondering Christianity. These words were written to Christians, and he is saying, you are different. Because you are a child of God, you now have a hope that the world doesn't. You have overcome the world. Jesus actually has overcome, and therefore you are an overcomer as well, because you are on his side. The faithful will see Jesus again, either on that last day or when you die, whichever comes first. Now, whether it's the apostles or the church, John's message here is loud and clear. Disciples lose nothing in the end. We overcome as long as we place our faith in the overcomer. And again, that sounds very simplistic. It almost sounds like, the law and order method, or just stop it, or, if you want to overcome the world, just have faith. But understand, your faith has to be well placed. It is all about having faith, but your faith must be well placed. Let's shift gears a little bit, and let's look at the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 6, we see an episode in Daniel's life, yet another episode in Daniel's life, where his faith is put to the test. What we know about Daniel is that he was a man who was courageous, who was firm in his faith, and we see that stand out again here in Daniel chapter 6. Have you noticed that much of the Bible is focused on this theme of exile? You see it over and over again. The people of God were exiles in Babylon, and we too are exiles as God's people living in this Babylon, this world. There's this exile theme over and over again that pops up in the Bible. And we should read ourselves into that theme, because we too are exiles. Peter calls us exiles of the dispersion, because we are aliens, strangers. We're not home, we're going home, but for now we are exiles. And within this theme of exile, the Bible talks about what I would call an exile ethic. There is a way to live as exiles in this world. There was a way for exiles of God's people, Israel, for them to live in Babylon, and there's a way for us to live as exiles in this world. And Daniel shows us this. Look at Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. It says, "It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." And so, just to kind of bring you up to speed here of what has happened from chapters 1 all the way to here, is that Daniel has shown himself, he's proven himself over and over again as a man of great faith. And here we see that every effort is made to come up with some sort of flaw in Daniel's character, and yet every effort comes up empty. Now, Daniel's an old man at this point. He was carried away to this kingdom that's now Medo-Persia, but Babylon previously. He was carried away as a young man because the king at that time, Nebuchadnezzar, was a really smart guy. Instead of just killing off everybody when he invaded a territory or a nation or a city, he would take the brightest young people and bring them into his court and raise them up and use them in his service. Pretty smart guy. And so Daniel's an old man at this point. He's remained faithful all the way through it to his God, even when it meant confronting the king. And so here we have an instance where these commissioners and satraps are trying to find some sort of flaw in his character, and they can't find it. And that's the first thing I want you to notice about Daniel. He had the right kind of enemies. You can tell a lot about a person by the enemies that they have. The people who hated Daniel were not loyal to God. They attacked Daniel's faith because they couldn't find a flaw anywhere else in his character. And no finer thing could be said about you than for your enemies to admit that they can find nothing wrong with you. The commissioners and satraps couldn't find anything, any dirt against Daniel, so they had to come up with a different plan. And here's their different plan. Verse 6. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document that is the injunction. So Darius took the bait from the commissioners and satraps because, who doesn't like to have their ego stroked a little bit? And the moment that the document was signed, it must have felt like Daniel's fate was sealed. He could either bow to the king's edict or he could bow to his God. And for Daniel, it was not even a choice. In the realm of coaching, preparation is key. You want to be prepared before you take on your opponent. And so you scout, you study film. Maybe you go to watch the team that you're going to play in the future and take notes and figure out kind of what their tendencies are. Because the last thing you want to do is enter into a game unprepared. Your opponent's throwing things at you that you were not ready for. Now, in my case, as a coach, I felt like that our system was good enough that if our kids played the way that they were taught, they were going to be okay. No matter what was thrown at us, we were going to be all right. That didn't mean that we didn't scout or try to find out what the other team might be capable of doing to us, but we just felt like that we had the advantage if we played the style that we knew how to play. If we did the things that we held dear, we were going to be okay. And you see Daniel here, holding to some core principles so that whatever system out there, whatever king was out there, whatever authority he was under, wouldn't change those core principles. While he observed what was going on around him, he knew if he just played his game, he was going to be okay. Trust God's game plan. That's what Daniel did. He wasn't going to change a thing about his character in the moment. Daniel teaches us, I think, a very important lesson when it comes to facing the pressures of this world, is that you just keep on being who you've always been. The best thing you can do is just keep on being who you've always been. When you face the stark reality of the lion's den, don't bend. Daniel didn't bend. Look at verses 10 and following. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been previously doing. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? And the king replied, the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Long story short, Daniel kept being who he had always been. The king's new edict didn't change a single thing for Daniel. Scripture states that once that document was signed, the first thing Daniel did was hit his knees. And apparently his enemies didn't have a hard time catching him in the act. He could have gone into an inner room somewhere. He could have hid himself as he prayed to God. But it doesn't seem like he did. He had always been open about his faith and open about praying to God. And here in this instance, nothing has changed. He keeps being who he has always been. He was already faithful. He was already dedicated and committed to God. He was free from corruption in the present because he had been free from corruption in the past. And so when they called for the lions, Daniel simply continued being who he had always been. You know, if you're going to run a marathon, you don't start training the day of the marathon. If you're going to play baseball and you never played baseball before, you don't learn how to throw the day of the first game. And if you're going to be faithful, you don't wait until the lions are growling. You start way before there's any sort of adversity, way before you enter into the lion's den. We should be working diligently each and every day to be Christ-like so that when the pressure is on, nothing changes. Nothing has changed. We just keep being who we have always been. When the lions start growling, we don't start running. Daniel could have closed his windows. He could have found a secret place to pray. He could have simply prayed in his heart and then obeyed the edict outwardly. He could have said, you know, this is just temporary. It's 30 days. I'll play along and then repent of that later. I mean, it's not that big a deal. He could have come up with several excuses to avoid being the lion's lunch. But Daniel made up his mind ahead of time that he was going to serve God no matter what. And I think he teaches all of us that there's got to be some boundaries in our lives. There's got to be a line drawn in the sand that says, not for any reason whatsoever will I cross that line. Not for any reason whatsoever will I allow the devil to cross that line and get to me. Putting up some safeguards. Daniel kept on being who he had always been, and he kept on doing what he had always done. The first thing he did was hit his knees. That's what he had been doing all along. Where do you turn when death is imminent? You do the same thing you've been doing all along. You turn to the same one you've always turned to. Some people have concluded that Daniel's house was the real lion's den because that's where the battle was ultimately won. When Daniel faced certain death, he went to the only one who could save him by hitting his knees and going to God. You know what he did? He assured victory. He assured his victory. Notice verse 10 again. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. Notice that phrase, as he had been doing previously. The circumstances of the moment didn't change Daniel's approach. He did what he had always done. His commitment level wasn't determined by how life was currently playing out for him. He hit his knees, and that was a staple. He did it all along, and certainly he does it here because that was a clear priority to him. And I want you to think about the different lions in your life. You think about the different lion's dens that you've been in. You've been in the lion's den probably at some point. If you haven't, Unfortunately, you probably will at some point in your life. Think about how you dealt with those lions. I'm sure prayer was a staple. But it's unfortunate, and I've seen it over and over again in ministry, that what people need God in the church the most is when they seek Him the least. Maybe you've been in that boat. I don't know why that is necessarily. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's shame, whatever it may be. Maybe somebody hurt them at church, but maybe it's frustration with God. I don't know. But it seems that so often when people need God, it's when they turn their back to Him. When they need church, it's when they turn their back to the church. But we are never stronger than when we are prostrate before our God. If we want to keep from being the lion's lunch, we must begin today by building a rock-solid faith that will not waver when the lions start growling. Let's keep reading, verse 16. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. This is because Darius, we didn't really fill in the gaps here, but Darius had a liking for Daniel. And he felt like he was in between a rock and a hard place. He didn't want to lose Daniel, but at the same time, the edict was sealed, and so therefore he couldn't break it. So anyway, when he had come near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, that they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king. I have committed no crime." Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children and their wives, into the lion's den, and they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Something very important here to notice about Daniel's character. Take note of his profound trust in God. We read this story with the benefit of knowing how it turns out. I mean, we read every story in the Bible with the benefit of knowing how it turns out, and that can do a disservice to us sometimes in application. But whether God spared Daniel's life or not, Daniel was good. He was okay. Daniel entered the lion's den in full faith that whether he was eaten or whether he was unscathed, God was in control. It was going to be okay. Daniel had his sights set on something bigger. So whatever happened, it was he and God, no matter what. And this level of trust is nothing new for Daniel. We could go back to chapter 1, the issue of eating the king's choice food. We could go back to chapter 2 and re-examine his confidence interpreting the king's dream. We could go back to chapter 4 and see the boldness by which he told the truth. We could go back to chapter 5 and see how he trusted God enough to turn down honor and prestige for the sake of doing the right thing. I mean, Daniel's faith was certainly well placed, and it was secure from the very beginning, so that when the lions were at their fiercest, he was not unprepared. He just kept on trusting whom he had always trusted. He kept on being who he had always been. He kept on doing what he had always done, and he kept on trusting whom he had always trusted. It's not that Daniel had to muster up enough courage to enter the lion's den. That courage and trust had been there all along. And if we trust in God when the pressure is light, then the chances are we're going to trust him when the pressure is heavier. But if we can't even trust him in the light moments, then how are we going to trust him in even heavier moments? It's interesting to consider this story from the lion's perspective. You ever thought of that? Think about how frustrating it would be to be the lion or lions. You have this tasty meal sitting right in front of you, and you can't eat. If Daniel had remained in that lion's den for a prolonged period, they would have starved to death. Daniel wasn't in the lion's den. The lions were in Daniel's den. The lions were in God's den. And therefore, they had no other option but to sit there with closed mouths and watch the proceedings. Now, I think there's a few things here to bring out very briefly. They're important for us to internalize as we go forward. And the first thing you'll notice is that God allowed Daniel to go into the lion's den. I mean, he could have sent a bolt of lightning to strike everyone down and he never have to enter into the lion's den, but he didn't do that. He went ahead and let him enter into the lion's den. So it doesn't mean that you're always going to be saved from the tribulation. Maybe you will be, maybe you won't be. Maybe you never have to enter the lion's den, maybe you do, but God is with you either way. Secondly, you'll notice that God shut the mouths of the lions, but He doesn't always. We read about in Hebrews chapter 11 some faithful Christians who were devoured by lions, who were sawn in two, who were beheaded. Just because you have faith doesn't mean that God is always going to close the mouths of the lions. He may not. But live or die, your victory is secure. And finally, Daniel teaches us that doing right things still come with consequences, don't they? I think we have this idea sometimes that as long as I live right and do right, that it's all going to work out for me in this life. And that's not true. It's all going to work out for you in the next life, but it may not work out for you in this life. In fact, the Bible is very clear that as exiles, we may face persecution, may even face death. But for those of us living in Dickson County, we might not face any major persecution, but we're going to face difficult times. This life brings all sorts of tribulation if we live long enough. But like Daniel, we must always remember the real issue. We don't play by the same rules as the world. We play by different rules. We value different things. And so we're going to face opposition. However, we also will face victory in this life and the next. So how does all this tie in with Jesus being an overcomer? That's what you're thinking, right? What in the world are we doing talking about Daniel if we're talking about Jesus being an overcomer? Well, because, like I've said on many occasions, and you'll probably get sick of hearing me say it, but Daniel is an archetype. He is a shadow of the real thing, the one who was to come. We see these characters in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, who were archetypes, who were shadows of the real thing. Over and over again, we're presented with people who have Messiah-like qualities, but they are not the one true Messiah. And the reason we're presented with these folks is because they point forward to the true Messiah that is to come. They get us ready for the better option, which is Jesus. And so we learn lessons from these men, and sometimes women. We learn lessons from them. Every empire has to answer to God. Daniel shows us this. Daniel saw even more rulers rise and fall through visions, but he saw rulers rise and fall in his own life. Every empire has to answer to God. There is no king or kingdom that God is not in charge of, and God is going to establish a new kingdom, one that will never fail, and one that will obliterate all other kingdoms of the earth, and one that will endure forever. But Daniel and the other exiles would have to be patient. They would have to remain faithful in the face of opposition until they had their overcoming moment. And we, as exiles, must do the same. It's the same message for us. It's not easy living day to day in Babylon, as many of you can attest to. Some days this world seems more like the lion's den than it does heavenly. We're anxious. We're fearful. We're well acquainted with the agony of defeat. But we wait. And we are hopeful until our overcomer returns. And while we wait, You know what we do? We simply keep being whom we've always been. We keep doing what we've always done. And we keep trusting in whom we've always trusted. That is the exile ethic for us. If you were to continue being who you've always been, doing what you've always done, and trusting whom you always trusted, how would that work out for you eternally? Many years ago, I had to look introspectively and ask and answer a really hard question. I asked myself, is the life that I'm currently living going to get me to heaven? And I determined that for me at that moment, it wouldn't. I asked myself another question. If my daughter, at the time I only had one daughter, if my daughter grew up to be just like me, would that be good enough? Oh no, not at that moment. That would be the worst thing probably. Ask yourself those questions. Is the life you're currently living going to get you to heaven? Those of you who have children, if your children grow up to be exactly like you, is that a good thing? The lions are growling. What are you going to do? We're here to help you this morning. If we can pray with you, if we can help you on this path to discipleship, if you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, do it. Don't wait. Come now as we stand and as we sing.